There we go.
There we go. Hey, good morning, everybody. This morning, I'll present a number of slides covering trade with the United States and with the rest of the world. The information comes from both Statistics Canada and the United States Census Bureau. There are a lot of numbers out there, and if you know me, I am a numbers person, and so I wanted to look up, and some of them didn't make sense to me, so I tried to make sense. I tried to make sense of them. There are a lot of numbers out there. Some of them, how they're calculated and where they come from is always my big question. First, a little bit of housekeeping in a couple of minutes. Okay, I have to go, okay. In the monthly report, there's a section called Economic Summary, and I'm just answering some questions that I've got on there. For example, Consumer Price Index, I put down what you see in the headlines, which is the 1.9%. But the last sentence is 10 of 15 products in our select product group were down year over year. And what that is I have selected 15 products which I think are of most interest to members of the association, and I present those, other than what the cost of gasoline is and food and so forth, which is published in most newspapers. And what that is, there's also key economic indicators. Now, these numbers are coming from my data, which is at the end of the report. So you can see, as in the Consumer Price Index, it's digital computing, household tools, stationery, cooking appliances, and and about 11 other items. This is what the average is for those items. And it all comes out of the same database that the overall CPI comes from. But I just wanted to clarify that that's where those numbers come from. So, as we said, some of these numbers, and I'll be saying which is which, come from Stats Canada, the US Census Bureau. The Stats Canada numbers are, of course, in Canadian dollars, and the US Census is in US. Most of these numbers are on industry base. There are numbers that are related to industries and others to products. I will try and clarify which one they are, which numbers they represent. I normally work with imports, which are reported in greater detail on a 10-digit level, if you're into it. Exports are reported on a 6 or 8-digit level. So there's a lot less detail. So many of the numbers I'm showing you are on an industry basis. So this is Canada's balance of trade. You see the star at the top. This comes from Statistics Canada. The red line, which is our surplus, monthly surplus with the United States, runs from 6 to 13 billion a month. It's converted to Canadian dollars on a monthly basis. The blue line is Canada's overall trade balance, which you can see fluctuates up and down over a balance or zero. The green line certainly shows a sizable deficit Canada has with the rest of the world. I put this slide together based on some questions I had received as well. So it's Canada's, the orange line is the value of oil shipped to the United States. on a monthly basis. The blue bars are the balance of trade with the United States. And the green line is the monthly exchange rate. I think a number of people have asked me, or quite a few people, well, what does the exchange rate have to do with our trade surplus, etc.? And of course, it's a factor, and there is an effect. But the correlation isn't what I expected. My expectation would be that oil and the balance of trade would have a greater effect on the exchange rate, or vice versa. It's not chicken and egg, it's more like chicken and chicken. So in the examples up here in August 22, we exported $15 billion worth to the United States in oil. But our balance of trade was at 8. While over here on the far right-hand side in July 24, we also exported $15 billion worth of oil, and our trade surplus went up significantly. Now, if you look at the exchange rate, it sometimes looks like it correlates with the other, but many times it doesn't. So over here with a rather sizable trade surplus, the Canadian dollar is down. Well, over on the other side, it was much higher. So it's just exchange rates are complex, balance of trade is somewhat complex, and there are a lot more things affecting the exchange rate. Now, oil. I put in the report, why does the U.S. buy Canadian oil? Certainly not out of an altruistic motive. Canadian oil is cheaper than the oil extracted in the U.S. and less expensive to transport by the existing pipelines. In fact, refineries in the Midwest, Rocky Mountains are specifically designed to process heavy Canadian crude oil. So it's simple economics. And what I looked at is then we spent billions of dollars building the Trans Mountain pipeline, expanding it. And it expanded the market, tripling the exports, maritime exports. And it was to lessen the discount on Canadian oil to the US. But strangely enough, early data shows the refiners on the US West Coast have been the key buyers of the new export volumes, accounting for just over half. So what we looked at, and at the bottom, you'll see as of 2024, our oil has gone up $10 a barrel, but the US still buys it. They buy it at $10 more a barrel from the West Coast and ship it down to California and other states on the West Coast for refinery. Let's look at the Canadian exports to the United States, and this is by industry. Right? Manufacturing, and I have manufacturing as a big number that I really rarely see mentioned in total. We all know about mining and oil and gas, agriculture, wholesale, which is interesting, and utilities. But when you look at some of the detail, which is on the right-hand side, it's interesting. Food manufacturing, $45 billion. Chemicals, 42. Primary metals, 36. there is a long, long list. And I have here all other exports are $94 billion. And the list is very extensive. I didn't add it up, but there's got to be 30 or 40, well over a few $1 billion. So Canadian manufacturing and sales to the United States is huge. And as we've seen in many areas, if you took oil out, it's basically balanced trade with the United States. Here are a few more details. You look when they say the auto industry, but it's just not automobiles. It's all parts, engines, chassis, plastic parts for motor vehicles, tires, etc. All of those, okay, add up to the auto industry in Canada that exports to the United States. And the piece at the bottom, aerospace products and parts, $14 billion. That's included in the transportation industry. So that's where you kind of look at it and say, of course, and these have nothing to do with cars. So you see those. The other manufacturing, and I'm going in some detail because many of these aren't covered. But if there is an increase in tariffs, these guys are going to get hit. Even if we solve the auto industry and the oil, these are still businesses that could be negatively affected. What I like is some of them is commercial bakeries and frozen baked goods, $5 billion. Right? Resins, turbines, measuring equipment, pharmaceuticals, and medicines, $12 billion. Sizable amounts. I threw in here at the bottom the total energy, where of course oil and gas has a lion's share, and there you have the hydroelectric. These items down at the bottom are just a little less than $1 billion. So it's big, but what I wanted to do is bring some of these numbers to show that it's a very broad industry, manufacturing and exporting to the United States. It's just not automobiles. Now, just want to take a quick look, or maybe not so quick. And what I have up top is Canada doesn't have a trade problem with the United States. Canada has a trade problem with the rest of the world. So these are exports from Canada. We export $30 billion to China. The other side of that is we import 60 billion. Okay. United Kingdom, Japan, Mexico. So in effect, we're sitting here down the bottom, we export 73%. 73% of our exports go to the US, while only 27 go to the rest of the world. But it gets even asking, what are these other countries importing from Canada? And if you remember the previous slide, which I have a footnote, United Kingdom imports $26 billion worth from Canada, but 20 billion of it is gold and silver. Right? Switzerland, I was surprised they were even on the list, but $5 billion worth of gold and silver. And I'm sure we pay a lot more when it comes back as jewelry and watches and everything else. But if you go down this list, they're basically all raw materials, which will then be processed and manufactured into something else and probably sold back to us. Another thing I looked at was trade deficit. Free trade agreements. Canada has 15 free trade agreements. A couple of them are still under discussion, under negotiation, but they're actually being used. So it's hard to say exactly what the status is. But if you look at it, here's a trade deficit under these free trade agreements. I scratch my head and ask, what did Canada get out of these free trade agreements? Mercosur, if you don't know it, and I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, is South America. So you look at that, and most of these, even if it was raw material, it would at least reduce Canada's deficit under all these free trade agreements. I've had some experience with this when I was living out in Asia, but I'll get to that in a minute. Canola oil is cheaper and in fact less saturated than olive oil, and it's better for you, etc. But I am very doubtful if you're going to get many Europeans to switch from olive oil to canola oil. But it takes a long time to convince people of that. Our biggest competitors in the canola oil is Ukraine and Australia. And their prices are often more competitive than Canada's. You kind of scratch your head and say, why? Okay, we have this huge production, many of them, and we have other competitive advantages, and yet we're outpriced. Europe in particularly, European countries restrict the use of genetically modified varieties of canola. And the exporters and growers need to be certified to meet the EU's market access requirements. I looked up to see what are those requirements, and there are about 10 steps, some of them going down as low as going to the Canadian producer has to have soil samples. I doubt we have similar requirements on our side. As I said, in Asia, I had some of this. I remember one where the Japanese had a lot of advertising go out in Japan saying that European skis didn't work on Japanese snow. The truth is, Japanese snow is a little different because of the ocean surrounding it. But the skis work just the same. But they were telling them their people don't buy it. And a lot of these pieces in these trade agreements are, I just wonder, are they trying to, protect the health of their citizens, or they're just protecting their producers and farmers and really not living up to the free trade agreement? The US Census. The nice thing about the census, and I didn't realize, I don't work in it a lot, is that when you have US dollars, you don't have to worry about exchange rates. So here's what the US trade deficits look like. Canada, and over on the far right, you can see the different years up and down. A negative 55 billion, and this is all in US dollars. No conversion, because by and large, what we sell to the US and other countries, the trade and the invoices are in US dollars. 55 billion. The EU, the US has a deficit of 214 billion. whereas China has a deficit of $278 billion. So when you break it down, exports, Canada and the EU are running together, up and down, just 300 billion dollars of exports. Okay, so we are selling, or Canada and US are selling there, where China, the US only sells $131 billion to China. And if you remember the previous slide, they have a $278 billion deficit. What does the US import? Well, they import from Canada 377, which you've seen the net. China, big number. The EU, and I was somewhat surprised. It's higher than I thought, but maybe not. I haven't been following it that close. But if we go into a summary, and I like this particular, the numbers in the middle are trade in goods. So Canada exports, imports, balances 55. Mexico, $157 billion. It's a big number. The EU, in total, 213 billion, with Germany 76, France 15. The EU is, of course, interesting because it consists of 27 countries, but trade is handled centrally. So it's the EU doing the trade agreements. Asia, enormous amount, okay? And this is for comparison to countries. We entered into a Asia Pacific free trade agreement. This is the same. The US is 690 billion in the whole, with China having the biggest chunk at 270, but it's basically every Asian country. China's actually come down, but it hasn't been that they've been buying more American goods. It's that more of the goods are being produced in Thailand. Big numbers. But what's not included in trade and services, the US has a surplus of about 8 to 10 billion. And I use Stats Canada because I couldn't find that number in the United States Census. Now that encompasses travel, transportation, and licensing. So that would even reduce the 55 billion down to about 45 billion. I have to say, when I started out, I wanted to find out, where did Donald get the $200 billion? And I think this is it. The number came out while they were discussing NAFTA. And if you add Canada and Mexico together, you get just over $200 billion. So the number is there. And in a way, I get an idea of why Ford said a few weeks ago of saying, no, we should separate those agreements. I think what he was looking at is, let's separate these numbers so they're easier to handle. Just a quick one. One I thought was interesting. I really didn't realize there were 3 official names. NAFTA seems a lot simpler to do than have 3 different names. So it's coming up in a few months for the 5-year review. I understand Trump would need to go to Congress and have them agree to reopen the free trade agreement. Doubtfully, he'll have a lot of problems with that. key changes in the last one was environmental, automobile production, Canadian for Canada, Canadian dairy, an increase in duty-free limit for Canadians who buy US goods online, which seems contentious, but one of the biggest pieces in the automobile piece was that the Mexican manufacturers would have to pay their employees a minimum of US $16 an hour. And they had a lot of discussions on how you would monitor and work with that. I thought I'd throw in a couple of other ones. Of course, the military piece is there. Targets spending of 2%. Trump is pushing to go to 5%. The US is at 3.4. Canada is about 1.4. Now, military expenditures under NATO's definition consists of two: expenditures on major equipment, this basically means new equipment, and expenditures in all other categories, maintenance and bases. Understanding the US push right now and having that the US is the world's largest exporter of military equipment, is this simply a piece of saying the US wants to sell more military equipment? Now, I put in the GDP numbers. The US is, of developed countries, is by far the worst, which is their debt to GDP percentage. Others higher. Canada is a little strange in here because Canada, while it's at 55.9, which looks pretty good, the central government is the federal government. The bigger number in general is including the debt of provinces. Many of these countries, or some of these countries, if they have universal health care, it's often paid by the central or federal government. So deficits and funding and so forth. And I just put a footnote down here. If in the Canadian number getting to 103, Quebec is at 83, Manitoba is at 80. But you can also see when you look at these numbers is in the US with healthcare, if that was a bigger state piece, they'd be higher. Like New York State's GDP number is 20%. California, 16%. Florida is down around 3%. And for those of us in Ontario, Ontario's ratio is 38. Not too bad. But all of these, here are the numbers. And as I said, or as I said at the start, is that this video plus the presentation can be downloaded, or you can ask for it from the association. We'll readily send it to you. You see the numbers. If you have questions, they're there, but it's, I think, nice to know what the numbers are. Now, I did one other little mischievous thing, I think, and I put up The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. And these are the big quotes from his book. Most people think small because most people are afraid of success, afraid of making decisions, afraid of winning. And to the right, the worst thing you can possibly do in a deal is seem desperate to make it. Down below, you can con people at least, you can't con people at least not for long. So I think he understands too, is he's got to deliver, and he hasn't got a big amount of time to do it, where the US goes into their midterms 2 years from now, which isn't that long for some of these big objectives. And I like this leverage. Don't make a deal without it. And I think we all know which type of leverage that he chose. So anyway, a bit of food for thought and hopefully for numbers to think about and look at. If you have any questions, that's the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any or find out answers if I don't have them. So, does anybody have any questions? Where are we? Only 11:35. Okay. Oh,
John, no questions from John?
there's going to be a test, you know.
You talking to me, Michael?
I am.
Nope, I have no questions. I do have a comment for you, Bob.
Uh-huh.
On the health side of things with the GMOs, do you know that Putin told anybody in Russia caught producing or using GMO seeds will be thrown in jail? So I think it's a health, that's his own citizens. So yeah, I think it's a protection of their health.
Yeah. All right.
Well, Bob,
But
as far as
but John, I think you also know that some of these, particularly Europeans, I found nowadays have all sorts of little twists and turns, and in the end, a lot of them are to protect their own producers.
Yeah, I don't know. There's definitely a health component to it. So you can go on and see all the Canadian or American products that are banned in Europe that are food products, and they'll cite the carcinogens in them for you. They're all there to be seen. So yeah, I think they're much more concerned with their health over there than we are here.
But I think the producers, because the producers produce, let's say, if you're looking at canola, we have canola that is not genetically modified, and have a problem selling that as well to Europe.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. We do? Mm-hmm. You know, you know that for sure?
Yeah.
Okay, because
now I read it.
The industry.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers on it, but only some of the canola grown in Canada is genetically modified.
All right, I'll have to look at that one more carefully.
But I think the big one there is, are you going to convince any Italian to use canola instead of olive oil?
No, because olive oil is much healthier than canola oil, so absolutely not. You've heard of the Mediterranean diet, right?
It's higher in calories, though.
Yeah, it's good. It's good fat.
Yeah.
That's not a bad word. Avocados are good fat as well. So
yeah. I'm gonna go have myself an avocado and olive oil salad right now.
Bob, can you do a cooking show for the next month's webinar?
Yeah.
A what? Cooking?
Cooking show. We can talk about ingredients.
Yeah, I've got about 4 kinds of olive oil upstairs that I've got to scratch my head about. No canola, so maybe it starts with us.
Use it, Bob. Trust me on that one. You're not don't tell me you're a margarine guy too, Bob.
Oh, well, no, I don't use butter or margarine.
Okay. Now, some of this stuff was developed as industrial lubricants converted to food, right? So,
well, there may be some positive things in
that. Yeah, exactly. If you're a cyborg, it'd be absolutely great.
Yeah. Question for you, Bob. When you were digging through the numbers, did you see any other countries outside the U.S. where we're seeing some export growth?
Well, Southeast Asia is doing okay, but even strangely enough, a lot of the business when people were shying away from China moved to Thailand and Malaysia. They did pretty well.
And of course, Mr. Trump has made the claim that the U.S. has enough oil, and I think natural gas, you may have mentioned as well, that they don't really need it from Canada.
Well, certainly
Obviously,
certainly in the short term, they need it. And I read a number of articles in preparation for this. Is a lot of the oil that they pump out of the ground in the US, they actually export because most of the refineries are set up for heavy crude from Canada and Venezuela when they were importing oil from Venezuela. So Venezuela and Canada have heavy oil, and their refineries are set up to handle it. And supposedly it would take a lot of time and a lot of dollars, billions, to rebuild those refineries.
exactly. All right. Any other questions from the audience?
I went faster than I thought. I was worrying I had too many slides. Maybe I didn't let anybody read any of them. So
Yeah. No, I think it was a great overview, Bob, and kind of laid out the trade situation that Canada is currently in. Obviously, have to see what may happen on the weekend, but sounds a
and
potentially the tariffs may not happen right away, but if they do, we'll have to see how Canada reacts.
yeah, and hopefully Canada, and that's why I put in many of the details. A lot of our, you know, everybody talks about oil, they talk about the auto industry, but there are a lot of other industries that would smaller, a bit smaller, could be very negatively hit by increase in tariffs.
Yeah, for sure. All right, then. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and we hope you'll be able to join us at our future monthly webinars, and look out for the reports that come out every month as well. And again, if you're looking for information on import and exports, or other information on product categories, please reach out to Bob or myself, and let's see if we can dig up some numbers for you. So
Mm.
have a great day, everyone, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.